Hello and welcome into BTN's Take 10 podcast. This is Alex Roux of BTN. We are back following week 2, leading into week 3 here in the college football season with another episode of the Take 10 podcast and another great discussion with a really phenomenal guest who I actually didn't know much about until this year, until we became coworkers this year. But I got to know a lot more about as he joined the team here at BTN and on this podcast as he shared some of his personal life. The name is Joshua Perry. For Ohio State fans out there listening, they know Joshua as a Buckeye linebacker, had a cup of coffee in the NFL, and then retired early. I think he's only about 25 due to concussion issues and injury issues, and now is forging a career in sports media, and that includes a role here at the Big Ten Network. This fall is his debut here at BTN, and he does studio work for us as an analyst on Fridays and Saturdays. So has a heavy load here at BTN, pretty much covers all the games, and really does a heck of a job. He's definitely, I know, impressed me and impressed a ton of people here at the office just with his knowledge and his ability to relay that knowledge and that insight to an audience, and to do it on camera and do it at such a young age. So brought Joshua on to not only talk some Big Ten football, but to discuss his career path and his journey to BTN and some of his interests outside of football. So really fun 20-minute discussion coming up with Joshua. And beyond that, we brought Harold Shelton, our researcher here at BTN, back in the studio for our weekly Stat Head segment, where we go behind the numbers of Big Ten football and go in depth into the nitty-gritty of some of the stats and in-depth analysis of the sport. So first up is Joshua Perry. Before we get to him, quick reminder, you can find the BTN Take 10 podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Podbean, and on the BTN YouTube channel and SoundCloud as well. So find us there, give us a review, a rating if you could, if you like the show. If you're not a fan, keep that review in your pocket and we'll be all good. All right, without further ado, let's get to Joshua Perry. The interview with the current BTN analyst, former Buckeye linebacker, starts right now. I'm very pleased to be joined by one of the newest members of the BTN studio team. He's a former linebacker at Ohio State. It's Joshua Perry. Joshua, what's going on with you, man? How's it going?
Hey, I'm great. How are you?
Doing great. Thanks for joining me on what's technically an off day for you here at the network. We're taping this on Wednesday, and for fans out there, you can catch Joshua in studio on BTN on Fridays and Saturdays. So before we get into some football talk, I want to talk about your personal path to our broadcast booth. And for those who don't know, you retired from the NFL after a couple years and several more concussions, and that kind of drove you and steered you toward retirement. So how long before you actually stepped away did you contemplate retiring because of those injury issues?
You know, it's really interesting. I think there are so many injuries that athletes tend to fight through, and I've been a fighter my whole career. And, so you deal with an ankle, you deal with a shoulder, you deal with an elbow differently than you deal with concussion. So after the 5th one I had, that was coming out of my second preseason in the NFL. I was like, man, how many more of these can I really take and feel comfortable? And that was kind of just a thought process, and I talked to my family a little bit about it and said, hey, you know, this is where I'm at. And they're like, you know, it's a good thought process. Just keep focusing on the grind. If anything pops up, we'll restart this conversation later on. Coming out of my 3rd preseason, that's when I had my final concussion playing football, and it just made sense to leave the game at that time. I had 2 previous good years in the league, was stacking up some money, trying to be smart about that, and then finally just, you know, understanding the fact that there are certain things that you can't get back, and your brain health is one of those things that you can't do it. So it made sense for me. I had full support of my family, and I'm really satisfied with the trajectory my career has taken since retirement. I love doing sports media. I do some other things locally in Columbus that I really get to enjoy, and I get to spend time around people I really care about. So It's been a good transition.
Yeah, I was going to say, from afar, it seems like it's been a really smooth transition. How long into your football career had you kind of been eyeing a move into sports media? Was this something that you've been thinking about for a while?
No, it's actually something that happened on accident a little bit. So I got home from Columbus after retirement, and I was looking for things to do. So the first thing I did was enrolled in a real estate class because I've always wanted to get into real estate in some capacity. I'm on the sales side right now. Actually, I'm a licensed realtor in Columbus. So when I'm not in Chicago, that's one of the things I work on. But the local radio station called, and I have a relationship with some of the on-air talent there, and they wanted me to do a pregame show for Ohio State football last year, and I ended up doing that. That turned into one of the local TV stations calling me, and I ended up doing a post-game show for them for Ohio State football on a weekday show, and I was doing high school football for them. Then that transitioned into me having my own show on Tuesday nights on the radio station, then hopping in on a different show on Wednesdays. And so it just started taking off, really. And I started getting reps in the business. I started really enjoying it. Met some cool people and ran into some unique opportunities to where I got the call to audition for Big Ten Network. So it was something that happened just off of, hey, you present well, you know Ohio State football, come talk about it on Saturdays, to, adding up to more and more different things until I got to this point. So very fortunate to have people that have invested their time into me in this part of my career and this part of my transition.
Yeah, at any point in this process, has it been nerve-wracking? Has it always kind of come natural to you? Like, even up through the tryout here at BTN, have you ever been uncomfortable on camera, on the air? What's it been like from a personal standpoint?
I was always the throw up before the game kind of guy, super conscientious, high anxiety type deal. So it was no different for me moving into media. I get the bubble guts sitting on set before the camera comes on, and then the camera comes on and things become a little bit different. I start to settle in. But most of the nerves that I ever have from anything I do just comes from wanting to do the best I can and wanting to do the right thing. So the thing that I really appreciate is the amount of people who spend time coming up with prep and stats, and then, producers spending time coming up with the segment, and then working on air with Mike, Glenn, and Dave has been awesome, because getting into the business as early on as I am, those are three guys you really want to be around, because they all offer different things. They're all veterans within the business who know how to guide. Like, Glenn was literally a coach, so he knows how to coach, but Dave and Mike are just true professionals, so watching how they do things has been super helpful for me as well.
Aside from the obvious positive feedback loop of you continuing to get more and more work, what kind of feedback have you gotten from maybe producers or bosses or family, friends about your work on air so far?
It's been pretty positive. You start to realize certain things, when you asked me how I was doing today, my answer was probably fantastic. That's something I do. I say the word fantastic to talk myself into having a lot of energy, to talk myself into having a great day early on in the day. That has leaked over on camera a little bit. So, just finding out that you have a crutch word, something that you're in tune with, different things presentation-wise. I hop on my Twitter, and people say that my goatee looks ugly on camera. To the point where, I called my dad and my mom, and I'm like, does this goatee really look bad? And they're like, it's really not a great look. So I ended up shaving it. But the one thing that I will say, Twitter is very helpful in terms of feedback, because people have nothing to lose when they say things. They're pretty transparent. And one thing that I have appreciated is fan bases like Michigan's fan base, or Penn State, or even Rutgers or Illinois, who haven't done so well in the last few years. Appreciate some of the takes that I have, and just the approach that I have to the game, having played against all those teams, having just a different insight into the game. So for me, I like being in places that are evaluation friendly. Football was always evaluation friendly. Everything's on tape. Coming into media, it's the same thing. Everything's on tape, whether it's me doing radio here, whether it's me being on Big Ten in Chicago. Everything is on tape. We can evaluate it. We can see what went well, what didn't, and then we can move forward with the plan to make sure that we're getting better each and every day.
Yeah, just don't let the Twitter trolls get you down too much. Don't let them start dictating your appearance all that often, or else you'll go into a rabbit hole. Joshua, one last question about your personal life before we move into some football. You mentioned you're into real estate and you do radio in Columbus. How else do you spend your time when you're not doing football-related activities or work over there in Ohio?
Man, it's crazy. So I spend time with family. That's it's just one of those priorities. You make time for what's important. So prioritizing for me is faith and family first, and then my work life comes after. So just being able to do that. I've got a younger brother who lives in town. Both of my parents live in town. I live with my girlfriend. My older brother lives out on the West Coast, but any opportunity I get to go out to Long Beach, I take that opportunity. That's super important. I like to read. I'm an avid reader. So whatever, I've got a stack of books, and I read about business, and I read about organizational leadership, those types of things. So that's been really cool for me to do, just have some free time during the day to be able to read. I like Hulu, like streaming, so that's one thing that I tend to watch. Just a couple of 90s sitcoms is like my thing right now. But I also have a charity, a foundation that I run here in Columbus called the Joshua Perry Family Foundation, and we work with kindergarten through 8th graders, and we want to inspire them through empowerment, self-efficacy, and education. So I spend time going to local schools, speaking to the kids. We do a school supply drive, so we give to the kids. We collect gently used clothing, so we're able to give in that fashion as well. And just anything that we can do to provide not only some of these resources, like I was saying with school supplies and clothes, but also adults who can invest their time into these kids and make them believe that somebody outside their community cares about them. I feel like that's a really important thing to have. And I know a lot of kids grew up without a champion, and it hurts them. I knew a lot of guys who I played ball with that were successful because they had a champion that was able to help them grow and progress and really be a mouthpiece for them trying to get to where they are in football or academics or whatever it was. So that's something I'm very passionate about, and I like to spend my time doing.
Yeah, it sounds like an off-work balance that we can all kind of strive for, and definitely highly encourage our listeners here to check out your foundation. And you're spot on that some of the the efforts that you're doing are so vastly needed, especially in communities like you said where kids might not have anyone to advocate for them. So that's awesome you're doing that. I'm glad I asked, and definitely gonna ask you more about that when we're here in person together. But for the listeners here, we'll move on to some football talk, and we'll start with your alma mater. I want to know what you've seen from the Buckeyes through 2 games, and 2 pretty impressive games from my perspective.
Yeah, so I think the first game, offensively, they got off to a really hot start. And a lot of that was the ability for Justin Fields to move the ball down the field through the air. And the defense they were playing against with FAU wasn't great, but, you got to beat the guys. You got to make the throws. And we saw him connect on some pretty passes. I like the addition of the tight ends into the game plan. I like the addition of some under-center play-action type looks into the game plan because tight ends are big targets. Often they're underneath, so it's an easier throw for a quarterback. Play-action opens up windows for quarterback. It gets the linebacker sucked in, and so you have the ability to throw it over the linebacker but under the safety into a pretty open window. So it helps a young quarterback like Justin Fields, who's very talented. But the other thing that I saw was the ability to roll the pocket, and that turns his vision to one side of the field. And you get levels routes, which means that you'll have somebody shallow, somebody in intermediate routes, somebody deep. You'll get flood routes, which means you'll have multiple receivers in one zone, and that helps make the reads really easy. And so the talent that you have coupled with the ability to go through read progression through some of these things that they're doing offensively is great. In the second game on offense, what you saw was the run game, and J.K. Dobbins coming back in, I think 141 yards and a couple of scores, and you ripped off a 50-yarder or whatever it was. That's what you see now is the combination between explosive pass game and explosive run game. Defensively, I think this past Saturday against Cincinnati was extremely encouraging for the Buckeyes because last year defense was what held them back. It was something that they struggled with. The run game was open for everybody they played. It seemed like they had trouble in the back end of their defense as well. And to hold a Cincinnati team that had a good running back and a quarterback who could make plays throwing the ball and running the ball to 0 points was very good for them. And so hopefully throughout the rest of the season, if you're an Ohio State fan, you see the Buckeyes climb the ladder on defense and keep playing at that level, because the way their offense can score points, if they have a defense that can limit other offenses, that turns into a championship mix there.
Yeah, I think they've definitely looked like one of the most impressive teams in the Big Ten so far. I'm curious if anyone, if you think, is approaching or at their level. I mean, two teams that come to mind. One is Wisconsin. I think they look like a resurgent team this year and just outscoring opponents 110-0. You can't really argue with that dominance. Penn State, I know they struggle with Buffalo, but the talent across the board on both sides of the ball is pretty intriguing, and I think they can, at least kind of approach that stratosphere that Ohio State is in terms of talent. So I'm just curious if you think any Big Ten teams are at Ohio State's level at this point, or at least approaching it.
I think that the closest team right now would be Wisconsin, and I think Wisconsin is ahead of Ohio State defensively. I think they're playing championship defense right now. Does not matter what the opponent is, but to hold teams to 2 shutouts is hard. It's tough for anybody to do that. And I think that they have their swagger back. Last year we had questions about what they could do defensively. This year we said, will they be able to fix it? And early on it looks like they have. They're creating negative yardage plays. They're creating turnovers. They're doing all the things that you would like to see a defense do. But I think the thing that puts them up on that level where you talk about great teams in the Big Ten, where you talk about somebody who can rival Ohio State for that number 1 spot, is the fact that Jack Cohn is going out there and he's doing a great job throwing the ball. And you already have Jonathan Taylor, who everybody knows about, is one of the prolific offensive players in the nation. And back-to-back games where he's had 4 touchdowns, you cannot downplay that. But Wisconsin going out there and throwing for 400 and running for 199 a week ago is what opens your eyes, because when you talk about Wisconsin football, you're not talking about passing for 400 yards. You might talk about running for 400 yards, but not throwing for 400 yards. So if they can manipulate defenses' game plans, because the way we used to do it when we would play Wisconsin is we would go in there, we would play straight man-to-man defense. So we called it over black. It was manned up. Everybody gapped up in the run game so we could stop the run. That's primarily why we did it. And then we said, beat us with your weapons outside. And oftentimes they couldn't do it because they didn't have the wide receiver talent or they didn't have the quarterback. And now when you look, they have Jack Cohen, who can throw the ball down the field, and they have probably 3 wide receivers that they feel confident in, led by Quintez Cephas, who's back after missing last year. And so now you can't just straight man them because they can beat you on the outside. You have to come up with unique defenses. You have to be able to go back and forth between man and zone. And they'll hurt you one way or the other. They'll find that matchup. If you're light in the box, they'll run it down your throat. If you're heavy in the box, they'll challenge you on the outside. And it's really tough to defend offenses that can do both. That's why I think they'll be great in the Big Ten.
Yeah, so far they certainly look fixed. Michigan State looks much better as well. However, one team that's limping in a high-profile fashion is Michigan. And I know you're an unbiased analyst, even though you are a Buckeye. And you're going to take no joy in this, but diagnose what has been wrong with Michigan so far for me, if you could.
And I think Michigan, so I'll say this about their first game. They're playing Middle Tennessee. People are like, they should blow them out. It shouldn't be a close game. Flip on the tape, and I want you to watch how hard Middle Tennessee played the whole game. They played like they weren't going to go away. That was a team that was scrappy. They had a quarterback who was gutsy and tough. It's hard in those games early on when a team is not just going to go away. Even in a home game, those guys said, you know what, we have our pride. We're going to come out here. We're going to play hard. And so give the other teams credit for doing what they did. The same thing with Army. That's a team of, like real guys. Those are dudes all the way. They're going to play you hard. They have their system. Their system works. They train at it like no other. So they present a unique challenge. But they played 2 teams that played really hard. I think the first game we saw a little bit more of an imaginative offense, with the caveat that I really don't think they wanted to expose their full playbook. I think defensively, in the first game they had their ups and downs, but they ended up playing pretty well. They were able to create some turnovers. They did what they needed to do. You look at the second game against Army, I think their defense did a great job. When you talk about playing a service academy, when I was at Ohio State, we played Navy in 2014. It's hard. They run the triple option attack. The guys play hard. They cut block. They're not super big, but they move like a machine. On defense, you don't know. We practice without a football because you just don't know where the ball is. And that presents a challenge. If not everybody does their job the way that they're supposed to, they're going to get a play. And I think their defense really did a great job. And even in that overtime period, you saw how they stepped up and they really won the game. I don't have a lot of criticism for that. I think the question is, and I know it's a different offense than last year, but it doesn't look any more imaginative than last year. And the trouble for them, like on a 4th and 2, you can't get 2 yards to convert on a run play. Like, that's an issue. When you look at the ball protection of Shea Patterson, he puts the ball on the ground a few times, and they're able, their Army's able to come up with some turnovers. That's an issue. And so the thing that you say is you can absolutely expand your playbook and come up with more creative play calling. The thing that you say is you can teach ball security and how to protect the ball in practice and correct those things, but it needs to happen in a hurry right now because I feel like people are starting to lose confidence in the Wolverines.
Yeah, they'll continue to be under that magnifying glass for sure. It's not going to get any easier for them. Joshua, I know you're up against a tight media schedule, the busy man that you are, so I'm going to ask one more question and let you go. Can't wrap up the podcast without talking about probably the best story in the Big Ten so far. It's the Maryland Terrapins. I'm wondering if you think they are for real, because, like, to me, beating Syracuse makes them for real, but are they for real? Are they going to make some noise in the Big Ten East this year?
I think they'll make noise, but this is the challenge of playing in the Big Ten. I want to pull this up because I think it's important to talk about it. They did a great job going out there and executing a game plan. When you talk about the amount of points that they put up, I think it's 63 points, and they only gave up 20. That's not what we're used to seeing out of Maryland. They've struggled a little bit. We all know that. I think their offense. They have a great offensive-minded coach, and so they've found success using a transfer quarterback, being able to move the ball down the field with the weapons that they have. McFarland is one of the better running backs in all of the conference, so I think they have what they want there. Their defense has made plays to me, and it's been a little bit surprising. I didn't expect them to be this far along, but I want you to hear this. Ohio State has 5 ranked opponents left on the regular season schedule. When you look at the rest of the Big Ten, Michigan has 7 ranked opponents left. Michigan State has 5. Penn State has 5. Wisconsin has 4. So they might run into some trouble throughout the Big Ten. But let's not forget that they're probably still a good team because you beat a number 20 ranked team out of a different conference, probably the second best team in that conference, what people thought. The Big Ten is going to get tough. There's going to be a point in this schedule where you're going to evaluate at the end of the year. You're going to look at a 2, 3, 4 loss team, and you're going to want to evaluate them based off of their record. But you have to remember the amount of depth and talent within this conference this year specifically. So if Maryland hits a couple bumps in the road, it doesn't mean that they didn't do a great job. It means that they played some really good teams in a really, really deep conference this year, and it's just a challenge for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with a team like Maryland in year one, with the depths of that program kind of sank to with everything that happened there, and rebuilding under Mike Locksley, I think you'd ask any Maryland fan and they would take a bowl game in year one if you asked them at the beginning of the year, and they're well on their way to that. So, Joshua, I appreciate the time. Thanks for dropping some knowledge with me. Enjoy getting to know you a little better, and we'll see you in a couple of days here in Chicago.
No doubt. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks once again to Joshua for joining me. I really talked him up, I think, in the intro, and hopefully you kind of understood what I'm talking about after listening to that interview, how smooth and talented he really is behind the mic and how lucky we are to have him here at BTN. So excited for what's to come from Mr. Perry as we move along. All right, as I mentioned at the top of the show, before we wrap up the episode, we'll toss it over to BTN researcher Harold Shelton for his weekly Stat Head segment. He dives behind the numbers, Big Ten football, talks recaps of Week 2 and looks ahead to Week 3 and gets into some of the matchups and what awaits us here as we move into already the third weekend of the college football season. Kind of fourth weekend if you count that week 0 matchup between Miami and Florida, but week 3 coming up. It's, we're not really that far into the season, but it seems like it's already going pretty fast. We've already kind of hit the turbo boosters here. So we'll see what Harold's got for us, and we'll toss it over to him. It's a stat head segment with our BTN researcher. And it starts right now with Harold Shelton. All right, very pleased to be joined once again in our makeshift studio. Just pray we keep the noise out today, except for the noise of our own voices, obviously, with the stat head segment. Welcome back, sir. How you doing?
I'm good. It's hump day. Week 3, ball still rolling. Less games this week, so that's always a good thing, at least for me.
Me too. The less games that are on, the more games I can focus closely on, which means I'm not scrambling in segments like this to know what I'm talking about. Right. So I'm on the same page with you there. Let's look back at week 2. There were a bunch of games. I tried to keep one eye at least on each game as they moved along. What was your big takeaway? Because mine, honestly, was the Dirty Terps.
Oh, absolutely. I thought it was interesting that Maryland was favored against Syracuse going in. And, Maryland didn't have a number next to their name, and Syracuse did, and you kind of wonder, that's interesting. I kind of thought Maryland would win the game just because Syracuse didn't play that well, but there's no way I expected them, to just completely boat race them. I mean, that game was over midway through the second quarter. It was not close. Terps have done an amazing job. And, they're just one of several Big Ten teams that are just scoring a ton of points already in the first 2 weeks. This is not your father's 3 yards in cloud of dust Big Ten.
Have you seen scoring like this? I mean, you have such a better frame of reference than I do, with Ohio State putting up a bunch of points. Maryland, obviously, we talked about Wisconsin going 110 and 0 over their first 2 opponents. Is there any other season that jumps out off the top of your head that reminds you of the start in 2019?
So, there might be 1 or 2 teams that'll do it. Like, Ohio State last year, they put up a ton of points in the opener. I think it was like 77 against Oregon State, and they followed that up, I think it was 52 against Rutgers. So, you get some games where it's like that, or some teams, but you don't normally get a ton of them. And, the fact that, Penn State, Maryland, and Wisconsin all have point differentials over 100 through 2 weeks, and no one else in the country is even close to those 3 is pretty eye-opening.
Yeah, it's not normal. And speaking of high point totals, you harped on it last week. Your alma mater, Michigan State, needed to cross that 30-point threshold. They more than did that. That had to be nice to see for you.
Yeah, it was. It was probably one of the less stressful games I've seen in quite a while. I mean, even games that they would win in 2018 and 2017 normally decided, mid to late fourth quarter. It was always, some kind of stress. It was good to see the offense just, put up points and put up big plays in bunches. Looks like they might have found a running back in Elijah Collins.
Yeah.
It was good to see, the offensive line play well. They kind of went away from what they normally do. They went more zone blocking. Took more downfield shots, less fullback stuff, less double tight end stuff. It actually looked like a more modern offense, and hopefully that's a sign of things to come.
Yeah, 50-burger Spartans put up on Western Michigan. Indiana as well, that was kind of expected against Eastern Illinois. I don't know if you heard this take yesterday on the air. I'm sure you did because you watched the shows. Michael Penix, Indiana's quarterback, who is getting some well-deserved hype. Our own Dave Wanstead said that he's on Antoine Randall-L's level. I don't know if you heard that or agree with that, but I thought that was an eyebrow-raising comment.
I did hear that, and I think from week 1, when he had nearly 400 yards in his first start, it had people kind of thinking of Randall-L. I mean, Randall-L was special. I mean, he was extremely special at Indiana. Those are really, really big shoes to fill for a guy who's only started 2 games, but he definitely has potential. I see why Tom Allen made that move. You kind of know what you're getting from Ramsey, and so far that has not been good enough to get to the postseason. I think you have to take a chance on a guy with a higher ceiling like Penix has.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of stress-free games, you mentioned Ohio State, Iowa over Rutgers. I think that was pretty expected. It's tough, for Rutgers to go on the road, and tough for anyone to win in Iowa, but I don't think anyone was surprised by that outcome. We addressed Wisconsin, so those are kind of the stress-free ones. Penn State as well over Buffalo. It was a little hairy in the first half, but they figured it out. But you want to look at a team that was stressed out till the final buzzer, really, until they ran and celebrated with their students in the end zone. Michigan over Army. That game was a thriller to watch. That was nuts. And really, Joshua and I talked about it on our discussion this morning. But Michigan just can't really get anything going right now. I don't know if any numbers stand out to you or any trends stand out to you. But obviously, Army made them play their game, slowed it down. It wasn't a huge surprise to me just because that's what Army can do with a well-disciplined team and a well-coached team. But why do you think Michigan has had trouble so far moving the ball, and do you think it can get straightened out heading into a bye week and a much tougher part of the schedule?
Ball security. I think that's the biggest thing for them. They lost 3 fumbles in the first half against Army. They lost 3 all year in 2018. They lead the nation in lost fumbles already with 5. So I think that's a really, really big issue. But I think that's something that's correctable. I don't think that's a schematic thing. I think that's just guys being careless and needing to take better care of the ball. They've had some injury issues. Donovan Peoples-Jones has been out. He hasn't played at all. John Runyon, who's an all Big Ten left tackle, he's been banged up, hadn't really played. And so, this bye week's kind of come at a good time for them. I definitely think those are some correctable things. But I did think it was interesting that, we heard all about this speed and space, and, we're going to open it up and, throw the ball all over the place and, have these running lanes for, the true freshman running back. And when the game got tight, it looked like a lot of the same Jim Harbaugh style, line up in the phone booth, run on first and second down type of offense that we've seen. The fact that Charbonnet had to have 33 carries and only got 100 yards on those 33 carries is a little concerning.
Right, and that was the big noon game on Fox, the kind of the marquee game. And then Fox followed it up with the Nebraska-Colorado game, which was just as exciting. A worse result for the Big Ten's perspective with Nebraska giving up a 17-0 lead and eventually losing to Colorado in OT. Is this a troubling trend for you with Nebraska because they, in the still very early stages of the rebuild under Scott Frost, have given away some close games? And I know when rebuilds happen, sometimes these teams just need to learn how to win. Young guys and players that have lost for a few years now need to learn how to win. So is this a trend that concerns you at all? We've seen it out of Purdue too, as a rebuilding program that gave away a game to Nevada, gave away a handful of games last year. What do you think is up with, just these kind of collapses that we've seen from Nebraska and from Purdue as well?
Yeah, I think it's just kind of a mentality thing. If you see Ohio State trailing in the fourth quarter, you figure they're going to find a way to win because they always find a way to win. And Nebraska, Purdue, teams that are trying to build something, it's more of if a team makes a run at them, it's, not again.
Right.
Here we go again.
Yeah.
And I think, Scott Frost kind of alluded to that when he spoke on Monday, that it's an attitude thing, it's a mentality thing, it's not a talent thing. And I think he's right. I mean, the fact that they still haven't won a road game under him, the fact that they are 1-6 in one-possession games under him is a troubling trend. And I think they have to, string a couple of those wins together to fully get the belief. It's all, fun and games, and you can run around and score a lot of points. But as soon as you get some adversity, especially when you're on the road, you have to find a way to respond. And so far, they have not been able to do that.
Yeah, so much of it is confidence, too. You look at a team like the Patriots, they know exactly where to be, what they're doing, because they're confident in the system, confident in the, obviously their quarterback, and where the receivers are going to be, and their defense is stout. So that's obviously the gold standard, but it just goes to show that, having been there before can make a huge difference. A team that did much better in a close game, if anyone was awake to see it, was Minnesota, Fresno State. The Gophers have won 2 close games now. They could be 0-2, but they're not. They pulled out both close ones. So Minnesota, is it a concerning sign that these games have been so close and they expect it to be maybe even a sleeper contender in the Big Ten West, or at this point you just kind of take the wins where you can get them and acknowledge that a game on the West Coast is always tough, especially at a place like Fresno State?
Yeah, I thought that was a dicey game to begin with. I think they were only favored by 3. Last year's game went down to the final minute. Antoine Winfield had to bail them out with a pick in the end zone. Did the same thing again this year. I think, yeah, exactly. Because from the camera angle, it looked like the guy was wide open, and then all of a sudden you just see him step in front and pick it off. Wound up walking in my house at 2:15 a.m. Because of that late game. Shout out to the Gophers for at least winning, making it a little easier for us. But I think there's something to be said for winning close games. I mean, they've won 4 straight one-possession games under P.J. Fleck. You know, Nebraska and Purdue have had a lot of issues in those close games. So, yeah, they could be, 0-2 or 1-1, but the fact that they were able to find a way to win those games, I think, speaks volumes for what they're trying to build. And, they've trailed for, and I think it's over 14 minutes in the fourth quarter already, and they're 2-0. And the fact that they're able to continue to win and to build, I think, is a good sign for the future.
Yeah, it's all about perspective, right? Because, there's plenty of examples out there if you're a Florida State or a Tennessee that have lost these games, and Miami too, exactly. And, you could be a Minnesota fan upset that you barely beat South Dakota State, or Illinois fan annoyed that you had trouble with UConn. But I think at the end of the day, you'll take the wins, obviously, no matter what, and at least be happy to be going into Week 3 2-0. And speaking of Week 3, let's get into some of the matchups here. Looking ahead, I want to start with Purdue because that matchup intrigues me quite a bit, especially with me not being too familiar with what's going on at the quarterback situation. Because I know Sindelar, one, is tearing it up on the stat sheet. He is leading the country in passing yards. He's up near the top, right? Up near the top in touchdowns as well, I believe. Yep. So that offense is doing wonders. It's kind of about the running game and the defense that's causing them trouble. And obviously now we don't know if he's going to be healthy for that one. And also there's some uncertainty on the quarterback side of TCU as well. So talk to me about the matchup with Purdue and TCU. It's just one of those games that kind of pops up and you're like, I never really thought about those two teams ever playing each other, but here they are. It's a night game. It's on BTN. What should we look for?
Yeah, it's definitely a tricky game for Purdue. I think TCU is a slight favorite, even on the road. I think things are definitely different if Sindelar doesn't play because you have Jack Plummer behind him with not much experience at all. They don't have a running game to lean on. We've seen it already. I think they only ran it 18 times against Vandy and threw it 52, and that was with the lead.
I didn't realize the disparity was that.
It was that strong, and the fact that they were able to do that and they had to lead the whole time shows you that they chose to throw. When you have a lead, normally you try to run the clock and you hand the ball off.
It can get you in trouble like the Nevada game.
Exactly.
The clock there was way too much time for Nevada to come back in that.
Right. But I think they just don't have any explosion at the running back spot. They got some inexperience and banged up offensive line play, and so this is kind of the way that they're going to go. They're going to throw it all over the place. Their strength is at quarterback and receiver, and so they're going to try to get the ball in those guys' hands and, kind of hope for the best. I mean, that's what makes them dangerous, but it can also, cause them to lose games like the Nevada game. And, TCU, they're kind of under the radar, which is the perfect place for Gary Patterson. Seems like when they have high expectations to start the year, they have have a few issues, but they're always great defensively. They have QB situation on their own. They played 2 guys in their first game against Arkansas Pine Bluff. They were off last week, but you got a Kansas State transfer who hadn't thrown it that well, and then you got a true freshman, and they're probably going to play both. And so we got QB questions all over the place in that game.
Right, and we got a sleeper cell from TCU. I don't know if you know that in the office, but our very own Brent Urena.
That's right. Where's his allegiance lie this week?
I don't know. We might have some bets going on in the office, but that's neither here nor there.
Exactly.
Speaking of tearing it up, before we move on, Rondell Moore is putting up some wicked numbers.
Absolutely.
Do you have in front of you what he's doing?
I know he's leading the country in catches and yards. I think he has already 8 games with at least 11 catches going back to the start of last year. No other player in FBS has more than 4 of those games. And so, again,
he could sneak into New York.
Yeah. I mean, when you have a guy like this who's an all-purpose guy too, so he's going to get touches as a returner, you try to give him the ball as much as you can. And, they kind of struggled with that a little bit early in the Vandy game. And then once they started getting him the ball, he started making things happen, and it broke that game open.
All right, so a lot of Purdue talk. Let's move on. Back to your alma mater, the Spartans. Because I remember talking about this matchup last year, and you were worried about it, and your worst fears came true because Arizona State, Herm Edwards and all, got the Spartans out west. Now, we got the Sun Devils heading to Spartan Stadium, and it's obviously going to be different circumstances, different weather, different time of different game time. So how do you think Michigan State responds after, first off, getting off to a nice 2-0 start and knowing that there's some revenge to be had from last year?
Yeah, see, I was hoping as a fan that would just be a noon kick, 9 o'clock, Pacific time in the morning for Arizona State to kind of return the favor of the 10:30 start Michigan State had. Unfortunately, that was not the case.
It'll get them ready for the 9 a.m. Pac-12 games next year. So.
That's true. I wish I could have seen that as more of a home field advantage. But either way, I feel pretty good about Michigan State in this game. Now, Arizona State does have a true freshman quarterback coming in. He's the 35th overall recruit in the country, second best dual threat quarterback in the country. So it's a guy who could play, like over 17,000 yards in high school, literally, total offense. So, it's a guy who's talented, but, you play Kent State, you play Sacramento State. It's a little different going on the road against this Michigan State defense. So even if they aren't scoring a ton of points, I think they should still score enough because that defense should be able to hold them down.
For sure. I'm not too worried about Maryland and Temple. I think they keep rolling. I know Temple got them, was it 2 years ago or
last year?
Last year, okay. So, it might be a trap game. I'm not worried about it.
That's a dicey game. I think that's a really, really dicey game.
Maryland's riding high.
If Maryland wins that game, I'll be impressed. Just because of it's human nature, and you got a bunch of kids, and everyone's telling you how great you are. Oh, the Terps could be, a dark horse in the East. You're ranked now. We're just playing Temple, whatever, no big deal. Temple's had a couple weeks to prepare.
Same thing happened last year after coming off the Texas win,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Temple was 0-2, and they went to College Park and pretty much controlled that whole game.
Right.
Maryland, I think, is the better team. They should win the game, but I think that's a dicey game if Maryland's not prepared.
All right, let's talk the rivalry matchups. Week 3 is always fun for me because, there's actually some bad blood going on usually. Like Pitt, Penn State, they don't like each other. Iowa State, they don't like each other. It's, there's some nastiness. There's, a couple scuffles will break out on the sidelines, all that good stuff. Last year, Penn State beat the brakes off Pitt, and Iowa won. Was it comfortably last year?
It was a really, really ugly game. They won 13-3.
Okay, yeah, that rings a bell now. So not nearly as lopsided as Pitt, Penn State, but I'm wondering which team or which game do you think will have a chance to be closer? Do you think the Big Ten teams will fare pretty well? Iowa State had a scare already earlier this year. Penn State's looked really solid. How do you see these games shaking out, and do you think either one will be close?
I'd be shocked if Iowa State isn't close. I think that's a complete coin flip game. Despite the fact that Iowa State needed triple OT to beat Northern Iowa.
It's in Ames.
It is in Ames. They should have beat Iowa 2 years ago in Ames. Nate Stanley had to have a career day to get them out of there with a win. Now, I know Iowa held down Iowa State last year, including David Montgomery, Bears running back. He shut him down. But Brock Purdy was not the quarterback in that game. He is now. They've had a couple weeks to prepare. No one's really talking about Iowa State, and they fell out of the rankings because of the bad performance. And that game, it's weird, Iowa's been the better program easily, throughout Ferentz's tenure, and he's only 11-9 in this game. And that's with the 4-game win streak they have right now. So we've seen bad Iowa State teams beat good Iowa teams, and now you've got two good teams playing against each other. I think that's a complete coin flip. Penn State, I would think, should win comfortably at home. They got a lot of big plays. Pitt seems to struggle on offense. They've had some quarterback issues for a while. I will say Pat Narduzzi does like pulling rabbits out of the hat. He's had some upsets, whether it's been Miami or Clemson. So he has a history of pulling off upsets, but I don't see it in this one.
Yeah, you're familiar, obviously. Pat Narduzzi, and I couldn't resist, but David Montgomery was shut down by Iowa. The only person to shut them down, as well as the Hawkeyes did, is Matt Nagy the other night. So
fair enough.
Let's give him a little more touches against the Broncos this weekend. Matt, what do you say? Before we wrap up, we got to talk about the Big Ten game. One Big Ten game going on in conference this upcoming weekend. It's weird because starting next year, I think they're stacked up a lot more in the beginning of the season. Here we've gone 0-1-1. So last week, obviously, was the debut with Rutgers and Iowa, Ohio State and Indiana. Tease us a little more this week, and then we get into the real thing coming up next week. So I feel like this Ohio State-Indiana game is one that every year I go into, and I'm like, well, maybe, if Indiana does this and this falls their way. And credit to Indiana to a degree because they usually make it interesting against the Buckeyes. But at the end of the day, it's 24 straight for Ohio State over Indiana. Indiana hasn't won since like 88.
Right.
So I don't know if you see this playing out any differently, if the head coaching change at Ohio State gives Indiana a little bit more of an advantage. It's going to be obviously in Bloomington, so that'll at least add a little variable to Indiana's chances. Do you see this playing out any differently, or is it going to be 25 in a row?
I think it just follows the same script that we've seen. 2.5 quarters, maybe 3 quarters. The game is extremely competitive. Mm-hmm. And in the fourth quarter, the talent just kind of rises. The cream rises to the top, and Ohio State is pulled away. We've seen it, throughout, whether it's, Indiana having the lead against Ohio State late third quarter, the last time they played in Bloomington, and then the Buckeyes score 29 unanswered.
Right.
We've seen, Indiana have a first and goal, with a minute left to try to tie the game and not score. And so we see Indiana keep it close, keep it competitive, and then they just can't close the door. I want to say Ohio State scored at least 30 against them 18 straight times. Indiana hadn't scored in the fourth quarter the last 3 times they played them.
Wow.
So those are kind of the issues where Indiana will play them tough, and then they just can't get the stops when they need them.
I mean, every year since I've been here, I feel like I've said one of these years Indiana is going to break through with that big win. We kind of saw it in 2016 against Michigan State. That was a big win at the time. We learned that Michigan State wasn't very good that year. Indiana's had some stop-and-start progress under, Wilson and now Tom Allen. This is a huge opportunity for them.
Absolutely.
And, I would be surprised, like you would be, if Indiana pulls it off, but the opportunity is there, and it should be interesting to watch. One more point before signing off. We kind of alluded to it earlier. Very interesting that Michigan and Wisconsin are both off heading into their big showdown next week. Do you think that's good for both teams, or do you think that serves one squad better than the other?
I think it helps Michigan a ton more than it helps Wisconsin. I think Wisconsin was kind of rolling. Now they get a couple of weeks off, and everybody's telling them how great they are, and we underestimated Wisconsin and all this and that. Michigan, when they had so many issues, so many injuries, a lot of things to clean up, you get that extra week, you can kind of sit back and look at what's gone wrong, what they haven't been able to do. They try to get some guys healthy for that showdown. I think it helps Michigan more than Wisconsin, but it's going to be hard for them to win the Camp Randall the way these two teams have looked so far.
All right, we'll talk plenty more about that game, I'm sure, next week. We're not too far off, I promise, from our professional, enclosed, private studio. But until then, this conference room will have to do. And the noise outside, I think, was kept to a minimum today. So we'll take that. And we'll enjoy week 3. And about 25% of the season is going to be already done a few days from now. It's pretty hard to believe.
Yeah, once it gets going, it seems like it goes really, really fast.
Can't really get off the tracks once it starts rolling. So
exactly.
Looking forward to it, and looking forward to sitting down next week and doing this all over again.
Sounds good, man.
All right, thanks once again to H and Joshua for joining me. BTN's really lucky to have both those guys. Both really good at what they do. And I hope you enjoyed those interviews as much as I enjoyed chatting with those two individuals. All right, we'll wrap it up with that. And we'll keep grinding along here as college football enters, I guess, the second quarter of the season. Kind of week 3 in the rearview mirror pretty soon here, and we'll already pretty much be 25% done with the regular season. So it's hard to believe. and we'll keep it rolling. So definitely keep listening. Keep it locked by subscribing to Take 10 Podcasts on, as I mentioned at the top of the show, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Podbean, and YouTube. Thanks as always to producers Julie Bronder and Wes White. Thanks to everyone out there for listening as always, and we'll talk to you soon here on the Take 10 Podcast.